The Theology of Arithmetic on the mystical, mathematical, and cosmological symbolism of the first 10 numbers attributed to Iamblichus, translated from the Greek by Robin Waterfield. This is a treatise that explores the mystical, mathematical, and cosmological significance of the first 10 numbers, emphasizing their symbolic and divine qualities. Drawing from Neoplatonic philosophy, Iamblichus examines how these numbers embody cosmic principles and spiritual truths, illustrating the roles in understanding the universe's divine order. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. Have you ever started on a project and somehow it led to somewhere else or something else? Well, that is how I landed on Iamblichus, by way of Plotinus's Aeneid, which you can find here in my playlist. Plus, the idea of numbers is a natural fascination for me, as I have experienced their value in my daily life, as many of us humans have, whether it be paying bills or preparing for a trip somewhere. Also, it is very useful in my personal field of divination and tarot reading. Putting Iamblichus in a historical timeline, he came after Pythagoras, who lived around 570 to 490 BC. He is generally credited with the Pythagorean theory of triangles and the functional significance of numbers in the objective world and in music. And from that foundation then comes Iamblichus, who is our protagonist. He was a Neoplatonist philosopher, lived around 245 to 325 CE, so this is many years after Pythagoras. Iamblichus was also a disciple of Porphyry of Tyre, the editor of Plotinus's works such as the Aeneid that I mentioned earlier. Iamblichus used mathematics in his philosophy to understand the divine realm, the human soul, and the structure of the cosmos. He believed mathematics revealed the underlying principles of existence and traced the soul's journey from the divine realm, represented by the monad, the ultimate principle of unity, down into material nature, where it becomes embodied in human form. Numbers, in this context, served as a means to understand the process of descent and the structure of reality that the soul traverses. In this way, mathematics was a tool for ascending to higher realms and understanding the nature of both divine and natural phenomena. Iamblichus believed that each soul had the responsibility to perform its own Demiurge, in other words, each one in charge of their own salvation, so to speak. The task being for every soul to partake in divine mimesis by creating a cosmos, which incidentally, cosmos is a Greek word meaning order. So, creating cosmos out of chaos, creating order out of chaos. He believed that when the soul descends into the body, it remains mortal and immortal at the same time, a paradox which is absolutely fundamental in the overall quest to create order from material chaos, and by doing so, actively cooperating with divine will. To me, these ancient philosophers provide a humbling opportunity to understand that we, the people who we are today, have been influenced from the past, making micro progress towards a path into the future. Imagine taking concepts from today and going backwards to its original cause or source. The list of names contributing to humanity's advancement will fill the pages of many books. Historians, which I am not, say that Iamblichus may have introduced a third sphere between the two worlds, separating and uniting them. Why is that of any significance, you might ask? According to scholars, it is this idea of this third sphere, this identification of nous, the divine intellect or mind, with the Demiurge. In the Neoplatonic tradition, it was adopted and developed in Christian Gnosticism. Later, this led to identifying the nous with Logos, the creative principle, as part of the Trinity. Apparently, the Old Testament does not explicitly state the concept of the Trinity. While the term Trinity itself is not found, it is in the New Testament where the doctrine of the Trinity is more fully developed. And going back to our historical timeline to help us see how one thing influences the other. In 382 CE, the Council of Rome finished the process of compiling the books of the Bible, both the Old and the New Testaments. One can see the progression of philosophical concepts gradually influence the collective thought. From the time of Plato, 570 BC, that was the era where there's polytheology, many gods, and then moving into the contemporary era of Iamblichus, 245 CE, and the concept of a trinity finding its way into the New Testament in 382 CE. While I may not be a scholar, I do give pause to thinking. These ancient philosophers, and current I may add, concern themselves with one question: why and how does the universe exist? It's important to remember that these early thinkers were not blessed with the scientific knowledge we possess today. These philosophers were exploring for the first time into the fields of natural science and cosmology. These were the folks that were bringing these concepts of numbers. So as we delve into the mind of Iamblichus, it helps a little bit to role-play ourselves into that era, imagining the fashion, the cultures, the politics, the scenery of Athens' academic gymnasium, the rawness of the times. Surely, at times, some of their conclusions might baffle us. Yet, it is because of these great thinkers that we are blessed with much of the knowledge that we take for granted today. Oddly, I see the succession from Pythagoras, who introduced the world of numbers, followed by Plato, who lived from 427 to 348 BC, who wrote in his Timaeus, also here in my playlist if you would like, where he outlines the Demiurge's creation process, including the formation of the world's soul from mathematical ratios that resemble the Greek letter lambda. That's why it's called, I guess, the lambda theory. Anyway, then Plotinus, who years later revived Plato's teachings and influenced his disciple Porphyry, which, here we have the connection. Iamblichus was a disciple of Porphyry. We have a sequence of philosophers, each standing on shoulders of the other, which indirectly have influenced much of the modern world in one way or other. So I thank you in advance for hanging in here as I introduce this material, something that I am fascinated, something that maybe you might find fascinating, as we delve into this content. So please bear with me. We are exploring ancient thinking along with mathematical concepts. This is a content that was translated from Greek and to the English. So the good thing is about this whole thing is we don't have to pass an exam. And the aim here is, as I have said in previous videos, is to allow the mind take you where it may. And there you will find a golden nugget that will unlock new pathways. I've taken enough of your time. I look forward to your comments. Let us turn the page. The Theology of Arithmetic on the mystical, mathematical, and cosmological symbolism of the first 10 numbers, attributed to Iamblichus. Translated from the Greek by Robin Waterfield. Dedicated to Pythagoras, who taught that for health, art, and science are inseparable. Quote, by him that gave to our generation the Doctrines, which contains the fount and root of eternal nature. End quote. Pythagorean Oath. Foreword. Kairos is privileged to present this timely translation of the Theology of Arithmetic, and is most grateful to Robin Waterfield for his dedicated and scholarly translation. We offer the following observations to emphasize the inner nature of a document like this, which invites interpretation. Diad, 1st or 2nd century AD, is one of the most important sources for the opinions of the earliest Greek philosophers whose actual works have for the most part perished. He says of Pythagoras that he was the first to call the search for wisdom philosophy, and that he assumed as first principles the numbers and the symmetries existing among them, which he calls harmonies, and the elements compounded of both that are called geometrical. And Diad continues. He says that the nature of number is the decad. However unreliable we choose to treat this transmission, even this brief extract does contain some remarkably significant possibilities which call for interpretation. That numbers were assumed as first principles is not unexpected, but the idea of symmetries existing among them is particularly evocative. Their harmonies are likewise said to be among them. Further, the geometricals are elements compound of the numbers, with their inherent symmetrical harmonies. The progression given by Iamblichus is from first principles to numbers, symmetries, harmonies, and geometricals, and it seems to reflect the progression arithmetic, harmonic, and geometric, which are the three primary means that Plato proposed that the divine artificer, Demiurgos, used to proportion the world soul, and you can find it in the Timaeus 36. Finally, that the nature of number is the Decad could place quite a different perspective on the issues that took up so much of Aristotle's time as he chewed over the paradox of the linear generation of the incomparable ideal numbers. The indication is that the Decad is both complete and is the essential nature of all number. A monad of minimum 10, that 10 is complete at 4, is a well-known Pythagorean paradox based on the simple cumulative progression of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10, or in the direct manner of those who had no separate number symbols by looking at this image of dots, where 1 dot plus 2 dot plus 3 dots plus 4 dots will give you the Decad in the form of a triangle with the first dot on top, 2 dots beneath that, 3 dots beneath the 2 dots, and 4 dots beneath the 3 dots, forming a triangle, as in Figure 1. However, there is obviously an allegorical reasoning which allows paradox to play a free part in the generation of simultaneous being of the first 9 or 10 ideal numbers. Given that Aetius' ultimate source is Theophrastus, who wrote in the 4th century BC the Doctrines of Natural Philosophies, Physikon Doxai, then we have a most interesting Pythagorean idea to contend with. That ideal number is not necessarily subject to a sequential or causal progression from 1 through 10, but is rather a unity with 10 essential and potential qualities simultaneously present in the Decad or the Tetractys. Although it is well known that numbers traditionally come before bodies, there is the possibility of understanding the shadow allegory of Plato's cave in terms of the number points, which we might call dots, representing incomparable sets of 1 dot for oneness, 2 dots for duality, 3 dots for triplicity, 4 dots for quaternity, and so on. In this case, the shadows would work in reverse, as it were. From the pure, indescribable light of unity, the first visual evidence, we might say, is for the units to become surface dots, which eventually become matter spheres, i.e., projecting into the dimensions. In this way, we can see a progression that embraces Plato's doctrine that images in the human mind reflect the universal source in the mind of the divine artificer. So we get one reflecting as a single dot or shadow on a surface for us to imagine or remember oneness from. If we should take the Pythagorean tradition literally, the first and comprehensive evidence of ideal or archetypal number is an array of dots in triangular form. See Figure 2, which is Pythagorean Tetractys as dots, Figure 2a, the Pythagorean Tetractys as close-packed circles in triangular form, and Figure 2b, the Tetractys of 10 dots with the basic symmetries between them. This pattern might be called, in current usage, a refraction pattern of a single triangle. It is important to remember that the ancient Greeks did not have an abstract system of number symbols, and used the letters of their alphabet as number symbols. They also commonly manipulated pebbles to learn arithmetic and used these small stones on calculating boards. In this case, number patterns were their common experience of arithmetic. From this use of pebbles, we have inherited the word calculation from the Latin calculus, which means pebble. This decad or pattern can be taken both as a graphic, differentiated form of 10 dots in 4 rows and or as one triangular form outlined in 9 dots with a center point. In terms of the Platonic formula for knowledge of any object, see the Platonic seventh letter, this would be the second stage of definition. From the above pattern, we can see how the tetractys of the Pythagoreans may represent both a minimal oneness and a maximal tenness simultaneously. The Pythagoreans must have based their deep regard for this particular form, see the Pythagorean oath quoted on the dedication page, on the breadth and depth of symbolism it carried or could carry for them. The doctrine of the essentiality of number, which has held so much inspirational power for so long, and is hardly far from modern concept of mathematical atomism, is A, unlikely to have been totally divulged in the literature, and is B, likely to have had more than one teaching related to it. Yet this multiplicity of teaching that inevitably leads to paradox is not necessarily a helpful ingredient during the time of nurturing dialectic and logic in a developing philosopher. There was therefore good reason for the controlled unfolding of the meaning of the symbol. Footnote: the fragments of the philosopher Heraclitus contain many masterly examples of teaching by paradox. For instance, his fragments 48 is, quote, "The bow is called life, but its work is death," end quote. The Greek for both life and bow mean the same, bios. End of footnote. This concept of unfolding or unveiling was particularly developed by the Platonizing school of Chartres in France during the 11th and 12th centuries, most notably by Bernardus Silvestris in his commentary on Marcianus Capella's Marriage of Mercury and Philologia. In it, the commentator defines the practice of integumentum, which literally means cover or wrapping, and usually referred to clothing. However, here we have the word used to refer especially to symbolic narratives and their hidden meanings. Figurative discourse, says our Chartrean author, is a mode of discourse which is called a veil. Figurative discourse is twofold, for we divide it into allegory and integumentum. He goes on to say allegory pertains to Holy Scripture, but integumentum to philosophical scripture. Hence he explains that his commentary on Capella uses this latter method because Capella is unveiling the deification of human nature and speaks like a prudent theologian because all his utterances contain a hidden truth. The work contains instruction, and this instruction has been put into figurative form. Figuration can also be one of the values or qualities that the divine artificer uses to decorate or adorn the invisible first principles of the creation. The word cosmos for universe means adornment. Thus, arithmetic and geometric figuration with the resultant harmonic musical figurations are the most essential tools that Plato posits the divine craftsman uses to adorn the likeness of the perfect cosmos, which he is attempting to delineate in the psychocosmogony of the Timaeus. There is not space here to develop all the interesting implications of how 4 is 10 and so on. So what we propose to do is to look at how Plato took care to reveal only so much of what are called by Aristotle the unwritten doctrines. Other and being in their unified mixture, Timaeus 35b through c, he set up what was subsequently been called his LAMBDA. It is a portioning arranged into 2 arms, each with 3 intervals. See figure 3, Plato's LAMBDA from the Timaeus, the first 7 portions of the triadic mixture of same, other, and being corresponding to the 7 planetary lights. And figure 4 is the missing position in the Platonic LAMBDA. Starting from 1 at the top, the generation from 1 to 2 and 3 gives the eventual 7 stages. Here we see the principle of twice and thrice, as well as the progression from 2 into a plane 4 and a cubic 8, while on the opposite arm is 3 with its plane 9 and cubic 27. Now we have 7 positions representing 2 progressions, which leaves us with the impression that there could be 3 more points or positions within the open triangle, so that if it filled, the model would become like the sacred tetractys of the Pythagoreans, or the triangular 4 representing the full decad. Even if Plato himself did not suggest the lambda form in the Timaeus, yet because the convention of triangular numbering and the image of the tetractys in 4 lines of dots were completely familiar to the Pythagoreans of the day, it would be inevitable that they would make the comparison. The idea of doing so is not new. The pattern we are about to look into was, in fact, published by the Pythagorean Nicomachus of Gerasa in the 2nd century AD. Before proceeding further, we will do well to observe that we are allocating numbers to each of the dots of the pure tetractys model, Figure 1. We are accordingly already moving into symbolic representation. Each dot becomes representative of a position in the process of generation, from undifferentiated unity into twiceness and thriceness in the first dimension, fourness and nineness as their respective planar reflections, and 8ness and 27ness as their projections into the ultimate 3rd dimension or bodily form. We have 2 squared and cubed and 3 squared and cubed, giving us a dyad of forms of generation passing through the 3 dimensions on each arm. The challenge that follows the allocation of 3 more points within the triangle, Figure 4, is to discover what numbers they should be, if they are not part of the existing progressions of 2 or 3. The solution becomes a matter of the logic of the symmetry or angles that the progressions of the times 2 and times 3 follow. If we start from the monad or 1 at the top and follow down the right-hand slope or angle, the 4-fold progression is 1 times 3 equals 3, times 3 equals 9, times 3 equals 27. If we now shift down from 1 to the position of 2 and follow a similar angle down through the pattern, we pass through the center point, which becomes 2 times 3 equals 6, and arrive at the point on the base, which becomes 6 times 3 equals 18. If we do the same starting with the diagonal that moves down from 4, we have 4 times 3 equals 12. As in Figure 5, the generating angle of the times 3 symmetry, starting from 2, generating 6, and 18, 3 times 2 equals 6, 3 times 6 equals 18. In Figure 6, the second additional times 3 diagonal angle from 4 creating 12 as 4 times 3 equals 12. Now, to check that this allocation is valid, we have the symmetrical diagonals following down the other way and multiplying by 2. Starting from 3 this time, we would get 3 times 2 equals 6, and 6 times 2 equals 12. The pattern agrees with the times 3 symmetry. Finally, starting from 9, we have 9 times 2 equals 18, which is the same result as on the times 3 slope. The pattern is consistent and valid. Figure 7, the generating angle on the times 2 symmetry from 3 generating 6 and 12. 2 times 3 is 6, and 2 times 6 equals 12. And in Figure 8, the second times 2 diagonal from 9 generating 18. 2 times 9 equals 18. Referring back to Aetius' statement of the Pythagorean position that number has the decad, or the tetractys, we might say, as its nature, and that the numbers have symmetry and produce harmony within, then we now have a pattern with all those qualities simultaneously present, our numerically symbolic tetractys developed from Plato's Timaean LAMBDA. In summary, we might say that the point positions one by one represent the decad. The sets of points represent the oneness, two-ness, three-ness, and four-ness of the constituent horizontal lines, which we can call the first symmetry. The allocated number progressions represent states of being, of the refraction of 1, we might say, and particularly of 2 and 3, respectively, as they move from plane to cubic form, and thereby provide a pattern that has within it the essential numerical harmonies. In particular, this decad contains those numerical harmonies proposed by Plato for such a vital story as the generation of the world soul in the Timaeus, as we shall see. On the basis of simultaneous qualities interpenetrating and mutually present, we might take the point model as representative of the background archetypal isness of the incomparable ideal numbers, those complete at 10. In another sense, we could take the allocated soul-generating numbers to be representative of the numbers moving into bodilessness or cubic being and ready to facilitate the geometrical basis of materiality. And you can go to the Timaeus 36e and 53c through e. The geometrical basis of materiality consists of the tetrahedron or fourness of fire or light, the octahedrality of sixness of the gaseousness of air, the icosahedrality or 12ness of liquidity of water, and the cubic 8ness of the solid earthness. These numbers are the points in space that define the solidity of the regular figures. Each of the basic geometricals can be generated out of a series of morphic points as three-dimensional reflections of the first monad, or the original singular spherical body, the sphere being the most perfect and most simple three-dimensional form, simultaneously representing the unique, unity, and the unified. However, to return to the significance of our number pattern, we learn from Plato that soul embraces both the mean proportionals as well as the uniting principle of opposites. See Timaeus 31c and 35a through b. We now can find out how the particular means, which Timaeus proposes the divine artificer uses to fill in the intervals between the primary numbers, can be found in the symmetries, or, in other words, how the harmonies can be read. It is good to remember that Plato describes the cosmogony as a likely story, indicating the objective laws that lie behind the ordering principles that we find in our cosmos, because this cosmos is only a likeness of the ideal. Again, see Timaeus 29c. This cosmogony or creation story is a rhythmic separating and uniting of forces which are given provisional names to enable us to even conceive of what is involved. First, there is the complementarity of sameness and otherness with their proportional uniting principle of being. When the divine craftsman made of them one out of three, straightway he began to distribute this whole into so many portions. Refer to the Timaeus 35b. There follow the 7 portions multiplying unity by 2 and 3 to get the sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 8, 27. Having made this division and related it to the sevenness of the planetary system, Plato goes on to describe the filling in of the intervals. This is done by placing 2 means between each of the powers of 2 and powers of 3. These are the arithmetic and harmonic means which, with the geometric mean, complete the triad of means. The means set up proportional unions between extremes and are therefore in themselves the epitome, in mathematical terms, of the mediating principle, in common with the definition of psyche, soul, as mediating between the metaphysical, intelligible domain and the physical, sensible domain. The means themselves are set in a hierarchical tendency, as one might call it. The geometrical is the most heavenward and metaphysical, the harmonic the most central, psychic and anthropological, and the arithmetic the most earthward, physical. So in Figure 10, Tetractys showing full display of musical ratios, the octave proportion of 2 to 1, the musical fifth proportion of 3 to 2, the musical fourth of 4 to 3, and the tone interval of 9 to 8. Figure 11 shows the arithmetic portion with the 3 arithmetic means of 3, 6, and 9. If we take these three means, the arithmetic, the harmonic, and the geometric, we find that the legs or diagonals to the right or left are in geometric proportion, i.e. times 2 or times 3. The pattern in figure 11 gives the symmetry of the arithmetical proportions. The mean is the middle, uniting term between the two extremes. So we have 2, 3, 4, and 4, 6, 8, and 6, 9, 12, which are all examples of arithmetic proportion. And 3, 6, and 9 are the means or midterms. An arithmetic proportion, it should be noted, is one where the second term exceeds the first by the same amount as the third exceeds the second. The harmonic proportion can be drawn as paths of symmetry within the pattern in the following way, as in figure 12, where the harmonic proportions with the three harmonic means of 4, 8, and 12. These new interior patterns give us the harmonic proportions of 3, 4, 6, and 6, 8, 12, and 9, 12, 18. The harmonic proportion is defined as the proportion where the mean exceeds one extreme and is exceeded by the other by the same fraction of the extremes. And you can refer to the Timaeus 36. If we take as an example 6, 8, 12, then 8 exceeds 6 by 1/3 of 6. Example by 2, and 8 is exceeded by 12 by 1/3 of 12. Example by 4. So in figure 13, we see the central 6 as a key to the whole number intervals devised by Francesco Giorgi. And figure 14 is showing the whole number arithmetic and harmonic intervals between each of the 7 original numbers of Plato's LAMBDA as proposed by Francesco Giorgi. HM equals harmonic mean, AM equals arithmetic mean. Note that this results in there being the non-repeating sequence of 6, 8, 9, 12, 16, 18, 24, 27, 32, 36, 48, 54, 72, 87, 108, and 162. 16 numbers of which the central number 36 occurs 3 times and is the square of 6 or 6 to the second power. The number 6 occupies the central point of our Tetractys on figure 13. We can, as Francesco Giorgi did, inspired by Ficino's commentary on the Timaeus, multiply the peripheral original set of 7 numbers to arrive at figure 14. We have constructed a new Tetractys based on Unit 6. This results in the next insertions of harmonic and arithmetic means following the Timaean cosmogony as we did above, giving rise to a total series as follows, given by F. Giorgi in his De Harmonia Mundi Totius, Venice, 1525. 6, 8, 9, 12, 16, 18, 24, 27, 32, 36, 48, 54, 81, 108, and 162. The original 7 are underlined. The 8, which are not underlined, are harmonic or arithmetic means between the sets above and display musical ratios. Francesco Giorgi gives another interesting veiled hint as to the meaning of the 3 means in relation to the 3 realms or domains. He calls the geometric mean the mean par excellence, which we would propose refers to the heavenly or theological realm. He calls the arithmetic means excess, which we propose refers to the earthly or cosmological domain. Finally, he says of the harmonic mean that is the harmony of the other 2, which in turn we would propose refers to the human, psychological, or anthropological domain. This links the 3 domains through the metaphor of musical proportion and with the pattern of the sacred Decad or Tetractys. This is a deep subject that needs much more development than current space permits. Our intention is mainly to indicate that the literature of the Pythagorean tradition tends to be a stimulus or an aid for the mind in its recall of unwritten doctrines, or so it would appear. Finally, we were drawn to another idea that results from adding one to each member of the first series. As in Figure 15, the new tetractys starting with 2, or the indefinite dyad, resulting in cosmic number or cycles. 2, the sun and moon, day and night. 3, the geocentric pattern of Mercury loops. 4, the 4 seasons or quarters of the year. 5, the geocentric pattern of Venus loops. 7, the cycle of the moon's quarter or a week. 9, the trine conjunctions of Saturn and Jupiter over a 60-year period or a lifetime. 10, the tetractys. 13, the lunar months of the year. 19, the metonic cycle of coincidence between sun and moon every 19th year. 28, the full cycle of the moon. This new set of numbers has an interesting cosmological quality. It includes numbers which were not represented in the previous set, and numbers that appear in the cosmic cycles. The apex takes up the generating role of the dyad, or principle of multiplicity, and thereby the created order. The first pair are the 3 and the 4, for completes the decad in the sense we have explained, yet this first pair of 3 and 4 also represents threeness and fourness as spirit, and matter, or principle and expression aspects of cosmic duality. Further, the cosmological 7 of the planetary systems and 1/4 of the lunar cycle, 1 week, are produced by 3 plus 4, and 7 takes up the central position of the new tetractys. 5 and 10, the quintessence and the decad, flank the 7. The 9, which is the last archetypal number before returning to the unity of the decad, or 10, begins the row of the 4 lowest positions. 13, which is the number of the occurrences of lunar cycles in a single year, as well as the number of closest packed spheres around their nuclear sphere, is followed by the very special number 19, which is not only the magic number of years it takes for the sun and moon to be in the same relationship, but is also a sacred number for both the Holy Quran and the Christian Gospels. Finally, 28 is the full cycle of the moon's phases and is also the sum of the central number 7, because 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 equals 28. Taken arbitrarily, such facts can seem curiosities and usually do to those ignorant of arithmosophy. Yet in the light of a wisdom teaching, they demonstrate particular depths of symbolic value and meaning lying within the arrangement of numbers. These examples of interpretation are an indication that Plato put forward the LAMBDA pattern in the first instance as one of profound signification, and yet left the inquiring mind to unfold the layers of meaning and the Pythagorean source for themselves. It has been said that written teachings are only ever partial. The Platonic 7th letter says as much, so we should expect that patterns given in the study of arithmosophy to appear simple and yet reveal more through sincere and genuine seeking. The truth, after all, is eventually one. Both in the world and in man, the decad is all. Foreword provided by Keith Critchlow. Introduction. The Theology of Arithmetic is a curious but valuable work. It is preserved for us in the corpus of works of the eminent Neoplatonist Iamblichus, but it is almost certainly not the arithmological treatise he promised to write on Nicomachus' Introduction to Arithmetic 125.15. The author of our treatise is unknown. This is, as far as I know, the first translation of the text out of its original Greek, let alone into a modern language. There are 2 main reasons for the neglect of the work. In the first place, Neoplatonism in general and Neo-Pythagoreanism in particular are not popular studies in today's universities. Secondly, the text itself is undeniably scrappy, The treatise is, in fact, a compilation and reads like a student's written up notes. Whole sections are taken from the Theology of Arithmetic of the famous and influential mathematician and philosopher Nicomachus of Gerasa, and from the On the Decad of Iamblichus' teacher Anatolius, bishop of Laodicea. These two sources, which occupy the majority of our treatise, are linked by text, whose origin is at best conjectural, but some of it which will very well be lecture notes, perhaps even from lectures delivered by Iamblichus. At any rate, the treatise may tentatively be dated to the middle of the 4th century AD. The value of the treatise is threefold. First, from an academic point of view, given the author's eclecticism, he has preserved, or he reflects, work which would otherwise be lost to us. That of Nicomachus is especially important. Anatolius' book is independently preserved. But there is also, for instance, a long fragment of Speusippus, Plato's successor as head of the Academy in Athens. The second and related merit of the book is simply that we have little extended evidence of the vast tradition of arithmology, as distinct from the hard science of mathematics among the Greeks. The Theology of Arithmetic is a welcome, if sometimes obscure, addition to the slender corpus of such texts. The third chief merit of the treatise is harder to explain. Pythagoras of Samos lived towards the end of the 6th century BC. Our knowledge of his work and that of his successors is usually tantalizingly scanty, but enough is preserved to be sure that, while in exotic areas such as mathematics, there was a considerable development, the esoteric and religious side of their work remained firmly based on the same principles and fully deserves to be called the Pythagorean tradition, which lasted for at least 1,000 years. At any rate, to anyone familiar with the fragments of Pythagoreanism and Neo-Pythagoreanism, it is immediately clear that a great deal of what the Theology of Arithmetic says could equally well have been said, and in many cases was, by a Pythagorean of the 5th or 4th centuries BC. I shall say a little more about this Pythagorean arithmological tradition shortly. Here I need only to say the following about it. Like Kabbalists, they recognize 10 principles of all things. These 10 principles are equated with or described as the first cycle of 10 numbers. Thus our treatise simply takes each of the numbers from 1 to 10 and spends a few pages describing its qualities and giving reasons for those qualities. These qualities are primarily mathematical and then by extension allegorical. So for instance, the number 1 is present in all numbers and makes them what they are. This is a straightforward mathematical proposition. An extension is to call the number 1 intellect, artificer, Prometheus. This approach has often been called superstitious mumbo-jumbo, but it is really only a different theological approach to ones with which we are more familiar. Mathematics is the most abstract language known to mankind. To base a theology upon it is to attempt to describe the abstract laws as distinct from their applications which govern God's universe. The outstanding nature of the Theology of Arithmetic and its third chief merit is that at one level it is unexceptionable and fairly simple Greek mathematics, since the complexity of mathematics lies in proving theorems, not merely in using the terminology, axioms, or conclusions. But the simplest mathematical statement is simultaneously imbued with religious import. The text makes it clear that for the Pythagoreans, mathematics was more than a science. God manifests in mathematical laws which govern everything, and the understanding of those laws, and even simply doing mathematics, could bring one closer to God. In the Western world, arithmology is inevitably associated with the name of Pythagoras and his followers. It should not, however, be forgotten that long after the demise of the Pythagorean schools, number mysticism was still flourishing among Jewish and Christian mystics. The study and use of gematria by Jewish Kabbalists is relatively well known. More often forgotten is the fact that even such seminal Christian writers as John of Rysbroek, 1293 to 1381, were perfectly prepared to see numbers as authoritative symbols and paradigms of divine principles. Among the Greeks, arithmology enjoyed a long history, as has already been remarked. It was practiced and studied concurrently with the science of mathematics and by the same practitioners. As far as we can tell, no sooner had the Greeks been prompted, probably by contact with the Middle East, to elevate mathematics out of the marketplace and into a pure science, then they also began to perceive philosophical and religious connotations to what they were doing. It is not too misleading a generalization to say that the Greek philosophers were impressed by the apparent orderliness of the universe, and that this was, for them, the chief argument for some intelligence being behind the universe. The Pythagoreans simply attributed this orderliness to the presence of number. Numbers contain and manifest the laws of God's universe. Since all numbers after 10 are repetitions of the first cycle, the first decad of numbers alone manifests these principles. In passing, it should be noted that the idea that the laws which govern the universe are numerical is not in itself at all silly. It is not just that we are happy with formulas such as E equals mc squared. These are perhaps different in that they are supported by scientific proof. More significant is the fact that we are still happy to accept more mysterious mathematical phenomena, like the Fibonacci series of natural growth, or Bode's law of the distances between planets, and a host of other series and constants. Do we, I wonder, have the right to praise these as scientific, but condemn the Pythagoreans as irrational? It should also be noted that while the Pythagorean attempt to give meaning to peculiar properties of number is unfashionably mystical, such peculiar properties have not been explained or explained away by modern mathematicians. They exist, and one either ignores them and gets on with doing mathematics, or gives them significance, which is what arithmologists do. The beginnings of arithmology among Pythagoras and his immediate successors are unknown. Both mathematics and its mystical counterpart belonged, at that time, to the oral tradition. By the end of the 5th century BC, however, it is certain that Philolaus of Croton was writing arithmology down. Perhaps his great fame depends upon his having been the first to do so systematically. A number of fragments of his work are extant, but the geniusness of many of them is disputed. Enough remains, however, to afford glimpse into an arithmology which is not vastly different in content or in quality to what we find in our treatise. The two great names from the beginning of the 4th century BC are Archytas of Tarentum and, of course, Plato. It is certain that Archytas made advances in the science of mathematics, but my opinion is that he left arithmology pretty much as he found it, though he certainly wrote on the subject. As for Plato, whose enthusiasm for mathematics and arithmology, especially in Timaeus, certain parts of Republic, Epinomis, and his unwritten doctrines as reported by Aristotle and others, cannot be overestimated. It is an insoluble argument whether he borrowed from a tradition or was innovative in the field. Those who do not wish his greatness to be tarnished by the suggestion of plagiarism should remember that in the ancient world the borrowing of material was not theft, but a sign of respect. It is likely that he both drew on and developed the tradition. Plato's Academy certainly nurtured both mathematics and arithmology, as we can tell from the titles of lost books written by Speusippus and Xenocrates, his successors as heads of the Academy, and by the presence in the Academy of the eminent mathematician Eudoxus of Cnidos and others. In the centuries following Plato, the science of mathematics was developed in technical works such as those of Euclid, Archimedes, Hieron, and Pappus, but the history of arithmology becomes obscure. It is not until the 1st century AD that we again start to have extant texts. The fragmentary evidence from the intervening centuries allows us to be sure that arithmological tenets were used in various commentaries on Plato's dialogues, especially Timaeus, of course, but the mainstream of progress can only be conjectured. That there was progress is clear, In the first place, arithmologists would have borrowed useful developments of mathematics as corroborative evidence for some property of some number within the Decad, or more generally as confirmation of the importance of number in the universe. In the second place, the extant texts of latter centuries assign more properties to numbers within the Decad than we can safely say were assigned in earlier centuries, which suggests that the intervening period was when these properties began to be assigned. And thirdly, as philosophical fashions came and went, arithmology absorbed the language and some of the doctrines of Platonism, Aristotelianism, and Stoicism. More importantly, the later extant texts often show a high degree of unanimity of thought and even of language. This suggests that there was some common seminal writer whose name is unknown to us. It used to be thought to be the polymath Posidonius from 135 to 50 BC, but who can be dated to the 2nd century BC. This unknown teacher seems to have given a new impetus to Pythagoreanism. The name of Pythagoras was no doubt never far from the lips of all the arithmologists of these centuries, but in the 1st century BC, in Rome and Alexandria, thinkers again began to claim direct descent from the master, and we nowadays call them the Neo-Pythagoreans. Many of these philosophers, such as Publius, Nigidius, Figelus, 1st century BC, Apollonius of Tyana, 1st century AD, and Numenius of Apamea, 2nd century AD, are little more than names to us now, though the work of others like Theon of Smyrna and Nicomachus of Gerasa, who were contemporaries of the beginning of the 2nd century AD, is better preserved. It is unlikely that we are dealing with a unified school of thought, but nevertheless the influence of this Pythagorean revival was great. It was especially strong over the Neoplatonists, but the early Neo-Pythagoreans also paved the way for Greek arithmology to enter the Jewish tradition via the works of Philo of Alexandria and the Christian tradition via the works of Clement of Alexandria. Now, this potted history of Greek arithmology is meant only to illuminate our treatise by putting it in context. What I have called the lecture note style of the book already warns us, and the context of the vast arithmological tradition confirms that the best approach would be to regard nothing in the book as original to the anonymous compiler, and to remember that far more ancient arithmology is lost than is extant. It is not just that our author liberally quotes from Nicomachus and Anatolius, nor that much of what our treatise says can be found here and there in other books. It is also that, apart from one or two more extended and discursive passages, such as the discussion of the relation between the pentad and justice, one constantly gets the impression that we are being shown the tip of an iceberg, that far more arithmological speculation was available than we know from treatises such as the Theology of Arithmetic or occasional remarks in other philosophers. As Keith Critchlow's Foreword suggests, the most convincing way to demonstrate this is to practice a little arithmology ourselves. In the last pages in the book, we find Anatolius associating the numbers 36 and 55 in various ways. However, he omits one context in which these numbers may be related, and this context is so obvious that it must have been known to the Greeks. It would have been obvious because it stems from Plato, whose authority was revered. In Timaeus, Plato declared that the primary sequence of numbers by which the universe gains life is 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 8, 27. And these numbers are displayed on a LAMBDA diagram as follows. A natural addition to this diagram, which completes it in the sense that it becomes a tetractys, says Keith Critchlow's Foreword, is to insert the geometrical means. And that's in the next diagram. Three things immediately become clear. That the three means we have inserted add up to 36. That the three apexes of the triangle add up to 36. And that the diagram now contains all the factors of 36, which, as our author says, add up to 55. A fourth point, that the separate double and triple series down the arms of the lambda add up to 55, is mentioned by Anatolius. This slight example of such speculation is deliberately intended to encourage others to do the same, as well as to support my contention that we are faced in the theology of arithmetic with the tip of an iceberg. An academic cannot acknowledge such speculation as evidence. His or her discipline is necessarily and rightly rooted in the available textual evidence. Otherwise, it fails to be the valuable mental discipline that it is. But I think that such speculation, provided it is not too extravagant, can afford personal insights, at any rate, into what the Pythagorean tradition was concerned with. The Greek text I have used in preparing this translation is that of V.D. Falco, Turbiner Series, Leipzig, 1922, additional notes by U. Klein, 1975. De Falco's text is the most recent edition, and this was only the second time that the Greek had been critically edited. The first such edition was by F. Ast, Leipzig, 1817. Nevertheless, because of the lecture note style of the text, and because of its inherent difficulties, over the centuries the Greek has become corrupted in many places. Much more work even than that of Ast, De Falco, and others remains to be done. Possibly some passages will never be recoverable. At any rate, I have often felt constrained to differ from De Falco's extremely conservative text. Those who are interested are referred to my article in Classical Quarterly, 1988. For those who want to compare the translation with the Greek text, I have inserted De Falco's page numbers in square brackets throughout the translation for ease of cross-reference. A convention I have used in the translation needs mentioning. Our author often indicates by various Greek grammatical devices when he is changing from one source, say Nicomachus, to another, say Anatolius, or even a different bit of Nicomachus. I have indicated such changes by leaving an extra line space in the text. A single centered asterisk is used when such a break coincides with the end of a page. Sometimes he jumps alarmingly from one source to another. On page 39, for instance, he attributes the content of one sentence to Anatolius, then skips to an attributed doctrine, which is probably from Nicomachus, only to revert without attribution to Anatolius a couple of lines later. For those who read German, there is an excellent account of this aspect of our treatise by H. Obermann in the course of his review of De Falco's edition in Naumann, 1929, pages 545 through 58. It was tempting to clutter up the pages with many footnotes, but I have tried to keep these to a minimum. I have footnoted only those passages where I felt that the meaning might not be clear, even on a second or third reading. There is a high degree of subjectivity about this, of course. What I think readers will find difficult to understand is not necessarily what any reader will find difficult to understand. It may be assumed, anyway, that those passages without footnotes are ones where I felt that a little thought could reveal the meaning. However, there are one or two sentences which lack footnotes, not for this reason, but because I completely failed to understand them. I owe a particular debt of gratitude to Keith Critchlow and Kairos for being easily persuaded that it would be worthwhile to translate and publish the Theology of Arithmetic. Several others have helped me to understand one or more passages of the treatise, and I would like to acknowledge such assistance from the following people: Professor John Dillon, Dr. Vivian Nutton, Dr. David Sedley, Rod Thorne, Annie McComb, Peter Thomas, and Keith Munings. It goes without saying that none of them are responsible for any remaining defects in quality and tone of my translation or commentary. Signed, Robin Waterfield. On the monad. The monad is the non-spatial source of number. It is called monad because of its stability, since it preserves the specific identity of any number with which it is conjoined. For instance, 3 times 1 equals 3. 4 times 1 equals 4. See how the approach of the monad to these numbers preserved the same identity and did not produce a different number. Everything has been organized by the monad because it contains everything potentially. For even if they are not yet actual, nevertheless the monad holds seminally the principles which are within all numbers, including those which are within the dyad. for the monad is even and odd and even odd. Linear and plane and solid, cubical and spherical, and in the form of pyramids, from those with 4 angles to those with an indefinite number of angles, perfect and over-perfect and defective, proportionate and harmonic, prime and incomposite and secondary, diagonal and side, and it is the source of every relation, whether one of equality or inequality, as has been proved in the introduction. Moreover, it is demonstrably both point and angle with all forms of angle, and beginning, middle, and end of all things, since if you decrease it, it limits the infinite dissection of what is continuous, and if you increase it, it defines the increase as being the same as the dividends, and this is due to the disposition of divine, not human nature. At any rate, as was demonstrated at the beginning of the arithmetic in the lambda-shaped diagram, each of the parts within the monad correspond to an offset, the integers. Hence, just as if x is double y, then x to the second power is 4 times y to the second power, and x to the third is 8 times y to the third power. And if x is triple y, then x to the second power is 9 times y to the second power, and x to the third power is 27 times y to the third power. In the orderly arrangement of all numbers, so also in the orderly arrangement of parts, if x is half y, then x to the second power is 1/4 y to the second power, and x to the third power is 1/8 y to the third power, and if x is 1/3 y, then x to the second power is 1/9 y to the second power, and x to the third power is 1/27 y to the third power. Every compound of plurality or every subdivision is given form by the monad, for the decad is 1, and the chiliad is 1, and again 1/10 is 1, and 1,000th is 1, and so on for all these subdivisions ad infinitum. In each of these cases, there is the same monad in terms of form, yet different monads in respect of quantity, because it produces itself out of itself, as well as producing them, just as if it were the principle of the universe and the nature of things, and because it maintains everything and forbids whatever it is present into change. It alone of all numbers resembles the providence which preserves everything, and is most particularly suited both to reflect the principle of God and to be likened to him, insofar as it is closest to him. It is in fact the form of forms, since it is creation thanks to its creativity, and intellect thanks to its intelligence. This is adequately demonstrated in the mutual opposition of oblongs and squares. Footnote: the diagram here is the application of Iamblichus' diagram, which is relevant to our text as follows. Nicomachus' Introduction to Arithmetic, chapter 2, 19, argues that the whole universe is skillfully contrived by harmonizing the opposition of the sequences of squares and oblongs. Additionally, all things are either continuous and have size, or are juxtaposed and have quantity. End of footnote. Nicomachus says that God coincides with the monad, since he is seminally everything which exists, just as the monad is in the case of number, and there are encompassed in it in potential things which, when actual, seem to be extremely opposed in all the ways in which things may, generally speaking, be opposed, just as it is seen throughout the introduction to arithmetic, to be capable, thanks to its ineffable nature, of becoming all classes of things, and to have encompassed the beginning, middle, and end of all things, whether we understand them to be composed by continuity or by juxtaposition, because the monad is the beginning, middle, and end of quantity, of size, and moreover of every quality. Just as without the monad there is in general no composition of anything, so also without it there is no knowledge of anything whatsoever, since it is a pure light, most authoritative over everything in general, and it is sun-like and ruling, so that in each of these respects it resembles God, and especially because it has the power of making things cohere and combine, even when they are composed of many ingredients and are very different from one another, just as he made this universe harmonious and unified out of things which are likewise opposed. Furthermore, the monad produces itself and is produced from itself, since it is self-sufficient and has no power set over it and is everlasting. And it is evidently the cause of permanence, just as God is thought to be in the case of actual physical things, and to be the preserver and maintainer of natures. So they say that the monad is not only God, but also intellect and androgyne. It is called intellect because of that aspect of God which is the most authoritative both in the creation of the universe and in general in all skill and reason. Even if this aspect of God were not to manifest itself as a whole in particular matters, yet in respect of its activity it is intellect, since in respect of its knowledge it is sameness and unvarying. Just so, the monad, which even if differentiated in the different kinds of thing has conceptually encompassed everything within itself, is as it were a creative principle and resembles God, and does not alter from its own principle and forbids anything else to alter, but is truly unchanging and is the fate atropos. Footnote: one of the three fates, her name means not to be turned aside. End of footnote. That is why it is called artificer and modeler, since in its processions and recessions it takes thought for the mathematical natures from which arises instances of corporeality, of propagation of creatures, and of composition of the universe. Hence they call it Prometheus, the artificer of life, because uniquely it in no way outruns and departs from its own principle, nor allows anything else to do so, since it shares out its own properties. For however far it is extended, or however many extensions it causes, it still prohibits outrunning and changing the fundamental principle of itself and those extensions. Footnote: the etymology of Prometheus is here derived from the Greek for not outrunning. End of footnote. So in short, they consider it to be the seed of all, and both male and female at once, not only because they think that what is odd is male insofar as it is hard to divide, and what is even is female insofar as it is easy to separate, and it alone is both even and odd, but also because it is taken to be father and mother, since it contains the principles of both matter and form, of craftsman and what is crafted. That is to say, when it is divided, it gives rise to the dyad. For it is easier for a craftsman to procure matter for himself than for the reverse to happen, for matter to procure a craftsman. And the seed which is, as far as its own nature is concerned, capable of producing both females and males, when scattered not only produces the nature of both without distinction, but also does so during pregnancy up to a certain point. But when it begins to be formed into a fetus and to grow, it then admits distinction and variation, one way or the other, as it passes from potentiality to actuality. Footnote: the relevant tenets of Greek embryology are that the father gives form, the mother matter, and the differentiation of gender does not occur for the first few days of pregnancy. End of footnote. If the potential of every number is in the monad, then the monad would be intelligible number in the strict sense, since it is not yet manifesting anything actual, but everything is conceptually together in it. There is a certain plausibility in their also calling it matter, and even receptacle of all, since it is productive even of the dyad, which is matter, strictly speaking, and since it is capable of containing all principles, for it is in fact productive and disposed to share itself with everything. Likewise, they call it chaos, which is Hesiod's first generator, because chaos gives rise to everything else, as the monad does. It is also thought to be both mixture and blending, obscurity and darkness, thanks to the lack of articulation and distinction of everything which ensues from it. Footnote: the reference to Hesiod comes from Theogony, page 116. End of footnote. Anatolius says that it is called matrix and matter on the grounds that without it there is no number. The mark which signifies the monad is a symbol of the source of all things, and it reveals its kinship with the sun in the summation of its name, for the word monad, when added up, yields 361, which are the degrees of the zodiac circle. Footnote: the letters of the Greek alphabet also served as numerical symbols, hence a system of gematria was obvious. The Greek monas is 40 plus 70 plus 50 plus 1 plus 200. Presumably 361 rather than 360 is given as the number of degrees because the first one is counted twice to indicate complete circle. End of footnote. The Pythagoreans call the monad intellect because they thought that intellect was akin to the one. For among the virtues, they likened the monad to moral wisdom, for what is correct is one, and they called it being, cause of truth, simple, paradigm, order, concord, what is equal among greater and lesser, the mean between intensity and slackness, moderation in plurality, the instant now in time, and moreover they called it ship, chariot, friend, life, happiness. Furthermore, they say that in the middle of the four elements there lies a certain monadic fiery cube, whose central position they say Homer was aware of when he said, quote, "As far beneath as is Hades, so far above the earth are the heavens." End of quote. Footnote: from Iliad, chapter 8, for the four-element model of the universe. End of quote. In this context, it looks as though the disciples of Empedocles and Parmenides and just about the majority of the sages of old followed the Pythagoreans and declared that the principle of the monad is situated in the middle in the manner of the hearth, and it keeps its location because of being equilibrated. And Euripides too, who was a disciple of Anaxagoras, mentions the earth as follows: "Those among mortals who are wise consider you to be the hearth." Moreover, the Pythagoreans say that the right-angled triangle too was formed by Pythagoras when he regarded the numbers in the triangle monad by monad. The Pythagoreans link matter closely with the dyad, for matter is the source of differentiation in nature, while the dyad is the source of differentiation in number, and just as matter is indefinite and formless, so also, uniquely among all numbers, the dyad is incapable of receiving form, not at least for the following reason. Also, the dyad can be called indefinite. Shape is encompassed in actuality by means of at least, and in the first instance, three angles or lines, while the monad is in potential. Calling the monad Proteus as they do is not implausible, since he was the demigod in Egypt who could assume any form and contained the properties of everything, as the monad is the factor of each number. Footnote: any unattributed they in this treatise means the Pythagoreans. End of footnote. End of section. On the dyad, from Anatolius: adding dyad to dyad is equivalent to multiplying them. Adding them and multiplying them have the same result, and yet in all other cases multiplication is greater than addition. Among the virtues, they liken it to courage, for it has already advanced into action. Hence, too, they used to call it daring, and impulse. They also gave it the title of opinion because truth and falsity lie in opinion, and they called it movement, generation, change, division, length, multiplication, addition, kinship, relativity, the ratio in proportionality, for the relation of two numbers is of every conceivable form. So the dyad alone remains without form and without the limitation of being contained by three terms and proportionality, and is opposed and contrary to the monad beyond all other numerical terms, as matter is contrary to God or body to incorporeality, and is as it were the source and foundation of the diversity of numbers, and hence resembles matter, and the dyad is all but contrasted to the nature of God, in the sense that it is considered to be the cause of things changing and altering, while God is the cause of sameness and unchanging stability. So each thing and the universe as a whole is one as regards the natural and constitutive monad in it, but again each is divisible insofar as it is necessarily partakes of the material dyad as well. Hence the first conjunction of monad and dyad results in the first finite plurality, the element of things, which would be a triangle of quantities and numbers, both corporeal and incorporeal. For just as the sap of the fig tree congeals liquid milk because of its active and productive property, so when the unifactory power of the monad approaches the dyad, which is the fount of flowing and liquidity, it instills limit and gives form, i.e. number, to the triad. For the triad is the source in actuality of number, which is by definition a system of monads, but in a sense the dyad is a monad on account of being like a source. The dyad gets its name from passing through or asunder, for the dyad is the first to have separated itself from the monad, whence also it is called daring, for when the monad manifests unification, the dyad steals in and manifests separation. It rules over the category of relativity too, either by virtue of its ratio as regards the monad, which is double, or by virtue of its ratio as regards the next number after it, which is sesquialter, and these ratios are the roots of the ratios which extend infinitely in either direction, with the consequence that the dyad is also in this respect the source of multiplication and division. The dyad is also an element in the composition of all things, an element which is opposed to the monad, and for this reason the dyad is perpetually subordinate to the monad. Hence, since form is capable of conceiving being and eternal existence, but matter is capable of conceiving the opposites to these, the monad is the cause of things which are altogether similar and identical and stable, example of squares, not only because the sequence of odd numbers, which are formed by the monad, encompass it like gnomons and produce squares by cumulative arithmetical progression, that is, they result in the infinite sequence of squares, but also because each side, like the turning point in a race from the monad as starting point and to the monad as winning post, contains the square itself, as it add its outward journey to return journey. On the other hand, the dyad is the cause of things which are altogether dissimilar, i.e. of oblongs, not only because the kinds of things which are formed by it are the even numbers, which encompass it like gnomons, and which are produced in cumulative progression, but also because, to take the same image of turning point, finishing post, and starting point, whereas the monad, as the cause of sameness and stability in general, seems also to give rise to generation, the dyad seems to admit destruction and to admit return journeys which are different from its outward journeys, so that it is a material substance and capable of admitting every kind of destruction. The dyad would be the midpoint between plurality, which is regarded as falling under the triad, and that which is opposed to plurality, which falls under the monad. Hence, it simultaneously has the properties of both. it is the property of 1 as source to make something more by addition than by the blending power of multiplication, and that is why 1 plus 1 is more than 1 times 1. And it is the property of plurality, on the other hand, as product to the opposite, for it makes something more by the multiplication than by addition. For plurality is no longer like a source, but each number is generated one out of another and by blending. And that is why 3 times 3 is more than 3 plus 3. And while the monad and the triad have opposite properties, the dyad is, as it were, the mean and will admit the properties of both at once, as it occupies the midpoint between each. Footnote: the source of something is already in it. Hence, if you multiply something with its source, no increase occurs. Additionally, the Pythagorean tradition was actually ambivalent about whether the sequence of numbers was generated simply by addition or whether multiplication was the cause. Traces of this ambivalence will recur in our treatise. End of footnote. And we say that the mean between what is greater and what is smaller is what is equal. Therefore, equality lies in this number alone. Therefore, the product of its multiplication will be equal to the sum of its addition. For 2 plus 2 equals 2 times 2. Hence, they used to call it equal. That it also causes everything which directly relates to it to have the same property of being equal is clear not only, and this is why it is the first to express equality in a plain and solid fashion, equality of length and breadth in the plain number 4, and in the solid number 8, equality of depth and heights as well, in its very divisibility into two monads which are equal to each other, but also in the number which is said to be evolved from it, that is 16, which is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which is a plain number of the so-called color on base 2, for 16 is 4 times 4. And this number is obviously, in a sense of sort of mean between greater and lesser in the same way that the dyad is, for the squares before it have perimeters which are greater than their surface areas, while the squares after it, on the other hand, have perimeters which are less than their surface areas, but this square alone has perimeter equal to surface area. This is apparently why Plato in Theology went up to 16, but stopped for some reason at the square whose area is 17 feet, when he was faced with the manifestation of the specific property of 16 and the appearance of a certain shared equality. Footnote: color is a traditional Pythagorean term for surface area. Additionally, a square whose area is 16 has 4 sides, each 4 in length. The sum of the sides is also 16. Smaller squares have area less than the sum of their sides. Larger squares have areas greater than the sum of their sides. End of footnote. With regard to what, therefore, did the ancients call the dyad inequality and deficiency and excess? Because it is taken to be matter, and if it is the first in which distance and the notion of linearity are visible, then here is the source of difference and of inequality. And besides, because to assess it in terms of what precedes it, it is more, while to assess the tetrad in terms of what preceded it, the tetrad is less, and the triad is in the middle of these two. So by this alternative approach, it will follow, contrary to what we found earlier, that the triad, rather than what precedes it, contains the principle of equality. For 2 is greater than what precedes it, 1, in the first manifestation of the relation of being greater, and 4 is less than 3 plus 2 plus 1, in the first manifestation of the relation of being less, and 3 is equal to 2 plus 1, and falls under the relation of equality, which is indivisible, with the consequence that the linear number 2 is consonant with what is more, but when raised to a plain number, it is consonant with what is less. It is also called deficiency and excess and matter, for which in fact another term is the indefinite dyad, because it is in itself devoid of shape and form and any limitation, but is capable of being limited and made definite by reason and skill. The dyad is clearly formless because the infinite sequence of polygons arise in actuality from triangularity and the triad, while as a result of the monad, everything is together in potential, and no rectilinear figure consists of two straight lines or two angles. So what is indefinite and formless falls under the dyad alone. It also turns out to be infinity, since it is difference, and difference starts from its being set against one and extends to infinity. And it can be described as productive of infinity, since the first manifestation of length is in the dyad, based on the monad as a point, and length is both infinitely divisible and infinitely extensible. Moreover, the nature of inequality proceeds in an infinite sequence whose source is the dyad, in opposition to the monad. For the primary distinction between them is that one is greater, the other smaller. The dyad is not number nor even, because it is not actual. At any rate, every even number is divisible into both equal and unequal parts, but the dyad alone cannot be divided into unequal parts, and also when it is divided into equal parts, it is completely unclear to which class of parts belong, as it is like a source. The dyad, they say, is also called erato, for having attracted through love the advance of the monad as form, it generates the rest of the results, starting with the triad and tetrad. Footnote: Erato is one of the muses. Her name is cognate with the Greek for love. End of footnote. Apart from recklessness itself, they think that because it is the very first to have endured separation, it deserves to be called anguish, endurance, and hardship. From division into two, they call it justice, as it were dichotomy, and they call it Isis, not only because the product of its multiplication is equal to the sum of its addition, as we said, but also because it alone does not admit division into unequal parts. Footnote: the Greek word for justice is dike, so we get dichotomy. And additionally, here, Iamblichus links Isis with the Greek word issos, which means equal. End of footnote. And they call it nature, since it is movement towards being and, as it were, a sort of coming to be and extension from a seed principle, and this is why it is so called, because movement from one thing to another is in the likeness of the dyad. Some people, however, misled by numbers which are already countable and secondary, instruct us to regard the dyad as a system of two monads, with the result that if dissolved, it reverts to these same monads. But if the dyad is a system of monads, then the monads are generated earlier, and if the monad is half the dyad, then the existence of the dyad is necessarily prior. If their mutual relations are to be preserved for them, they necessarily coexist, because double is double what is half, and half is half what is double. And they are neither prior nor posterior, because they generate and are generated by each other, destroy and are destroyed by each other. They also name it Demeter, the mother of Zeus. They said that the monad was Zeus, and Rhea after its flux and extension, which are the properties both of the dyad and of nature, which is in all respects coming into being, and they say that the name dyad is suited to the moon, both because it admits of more settings than any of the other planets, and because the moon is halved or divided into two, for it is said to be cut into half or into two. End of this section on the dyad. Let's move on to the next video as we continue to explore and learn how this theology of number is trying to explain to us insights into the divine and human realms. If you haven't done so yet, hit like, share, and subscribe.